Your dog just drank from a puddle that has been sitting in a parking lot for 3 days. You watched it happen. You tried to stop it. You were too slow. And now your dog is looking up at you with the serene expression of an animal that has no idea why you're upset, because from the dog's perspective, that was a perfectly reasonable decision and possibly the best thing that's happened today. And here's the thing. The dog is probably fine. Not probably fine in the way that you'd be probably fine if you drank from a 3-day-old parking lot puddle. Which is to say, not fine at all, not even a little bit. But biologically, mechanistically fine. Because the dog's relationship with contaminated water is fundamentally different from yours, built on a completely different set of biological defenses that were refined over thousands of years of evolution in environments where clean water was not something anyone was providing. The question of why dogs can drink dirty water and survive is not just interesting, it leads somewhere surprising. Into the specific biology of canine immunity, into the evolutionary history of the relationship between dogs and pathogens, into the chemistry of dog saliva and stomach acid, and into a comparison with human water safety that changes the picture of what's actually impressive here. Let's go through it properly. Start with the stomach, because this is where the most immediately important defense lies and where the difference between dogs and humans is most stark. Stomach acid is measured on the pH scale. Lower pH means more acidic. Human stomach acid typically sits at a pH of between 1.5 and 3.5, already quite acidic, which is why it is an effective barrier against many pathogens. Dog stomach acid operates at a pH closer to 1, lower, more acidic, and significantly more hostile to the microorganisms that make contaminated water dangerous. This difference matters because the primary mechanism by which contaminated water causes illness is not the water itself. It is the microorganisms in the water. Bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, various viruses that pass through the mouth and into the digestive system and establish themselves there. The stomach acid is the first major internal defense against this colonization. More acidic stomach means more organisms are killed before they ever reach the intestines. The dog's more acidic stomach is a more effective kill zone than the human equivalent. But stomach acid is not the whole story. Dogs also pass food and water through their digestive systems more quickly than humans in some respects, which reduces the window of time during which pathogens can interact with the gut lining and establish infection. This transit difference is not universal across all circumstances. Dogs can also retain food for extended periods when they're processing complex meals, but the overall digestive efficiency of dogs in dealing with contaminated inputs reflects a system optimized for exactly this kind of challenge. Now let's talk about saliva, because this is where the dog biology gets most interesting, and where the dogs have clean mouths myth, which is completely false and worth debunking, gives way to a more accurate and more interesting picture. Dog saliva does not have magical antimicrobial properties in the way the myth suggests. The myth that a dog's mouth is cleaner than a human's is false. Dog mouths contain large numbers of bacteria, many of them species-specific, meaning they are canine bacteria that don't typically establish themselves in human mouths, but this is about host specificity, not about cleanliness. The dog mouth is not clean. It is differently contaminated from the human mouth. What dog saliva does have is a specific enzyme profile that differs from human saliva in ways relevant to pathogen defense. Lysozyme is an enzyme present in the saliva of many mammals, including both dogs and humans, that damages the cell walls of certain bacteria. Dog saliva contains lysozyme at levels that are somewhat higher than in human saliva, providing a degree of first-pass antimicrobial activity at the point of water entry. This is a real effect, but it is modest. Lysozyme is effective against some gram-positive bacteria, but less effective against gram-negative bacteria, which include many of the most problematic waterborne pathogens. More relevant than the specific enzyme content is the dog's overall immune architecture at the mucosal surface of the digestive tract. The mucous membranes lining the dog's mouth, throat, and digestive system are the first physical barrier against ingested pathogens. And dogs that have lived outside or in variable environments have mucosal immune systems that are continuously calibrated by pathogen exposure in ways that indoor animals and modern humans are not. This continuous calibration matters enormously. The immune system is not a static defense. It is a learning system, continuously updated by the pathogens and microorganisms it encounters. An immune system that regularly encounters the microbial load of outdoor water sources develops specific memory responses to the organisms that live in those sources. The dog that has been drinking from outdoor water sources regularly has an immune system that has met most of the pathogens those sources contain and has learned how to respond to them efficiently. A human who has drunk only treated municipal water for their entire life has an immune system with no such memory for the specific organisms in outdoor water sources. Encounter them for the first time, and the response is slower, less specific, and more likely to result in illness while the immune system figures out what it's dealing with. Now let's talk about the evolutionary history, because the dog's water tolerance is not random. It was built by a specific evolutionary context that makes perfect sense once you understand what dogs actually are and where they came from. Dogs are descended from wolves. Wolves are scavengers as much as hunters, perhaps more so by caloric intake than the hunting image suggests. A wolf pack will eat carrion, will consume prey animals that have been dead for days, will drink from whatever water source is available, including stagnant pools near animal carcasses. The wolf that refused to drink from anything but a pristine mountain stream was the wolf that died of thirst. The wolf that could process contaminated water without becoming incapacitated was the wolf that survived to reproduce. This selection pressure, thousands of generations of wolves surviving on the food and water that scavenger lifestyles required, built digestive systems and immune systems specifically adapted to high contamination inputs. When wolves domesticated themselves through proximity to human settlements, the selection pressure didn't disappear. The early proto-dogs were eating human refuse, foraging through middens and waste piles, consuming food and water that was of highly variable quality. Again, the individuals that got sick and died from contaminated food and water were selected against. The individuals whose biology could handle it survived and produced offspring. By the time the domestic dog, as we know it, emerged, the canine digestive system had been refined by hundreds of thousands of years of selection in contamination-rich environments. The stomach acid, the mucosal immunity, the microbiome composition, the pathogen-specific immune memory, all of it is the product of that selection history. The dog doesn't drink from a dirty puddle despite its biology. It drinks from a dirty puddle because of it. Now let's talk about the microbiome, because this is the dimension of canine water tolerance that is most complex and most interesting, and that the field of microbiology has only begun to characterize in detail. The gastrointestinal microbiome, the community of trillions of microorganisms that live in the gut, is now understood to be central to immune function, digestive efficiency, and resistance to pathogen colonization. The specific composition of the gut microbiome determines in large part how effectively the immune system responds to pathogen challenges, how well the gut can resist colonization by harmful organisms, and how efficiently the host can process and detoxify problematic substances. Dog gut microbiomes differ from human gut microbiomes in composition, in diversity, and in the specific functional capacities the resident microbial communities provide. Specifically, dogs that have regular exposure to outdoor environments and variable water sources tend to have gut microbiomes with broader diversity than dogs kept entirely indoors and fed exclusively on commercial food. Broader microbial diversity in the gut is generally associated with better immune function and better resistance to pathogen colonization, a principle that applies across mammalian species. The outdoor dog drinking from puddles is not just testing its immune system. It is continuously updating its gut microbiome with the microbial inputs from those water sources, maintaining a microbial community with broader diversity and more specific functional capacities than a microbiome that has never been challenged. The dirty puddle is, in a very real sense, a microbiome maintenance activity. The dog's gut community is better for the exposure. This is not an endorsement of letting your dog drink from contaminated water indefinitely. The principle has limits. There are organisms in some water sources that are pathogenic to dogs, and the dog's defenses are not unlimited. But the underlying biology is real, and the direction of the effect is clearly toward the dog being adapted to handle contamination that would floor a human. Now let's talk about something that connects the evolutionary history to the specific daily biology in a way that most accounts of canine water tolerance miss: the role of behavioral patterns in maintaining biological defenses. The dog that regularly drinks from outdoor water sources is not just getting pathogen exposure that calibrates its immune system, it is running a behavioral pattern that has been selected for across the entire history of the species. Dogs actively seek novel water sources. They investigate puddles, streams, ponds, and any body of standing water they encounter with an interest that goes beyond simple thirst. They sniff the water, they assess it, and in most cases, they drink from it. This investigative then drink behavior is not recklessness. It is a refined behavioral strategy that balances the information available. The smell of the water, the presence of other animals nearby, the appearance of the source, with the evolutionary baseline that outdoor water is generally worth consuming. The olfactory assessment that precedes drinking gives the dog some degree of crude pathogen detection. Certain microbial communities produce distinctive smell profiles that experienced outdoor dogs may have learned to associate with problematic water. The behavioral investigation is part of the defense system. Compare this to the human behavioral pattern around water, which has been so thoroughly shaped by clean water infrastructure that most people in developed countries have essentially no behavioral toolkit for assessing outdoor water quality. The smell test, the appearance assessment, the awareness of upstream land use. These are skills that exist in traditional and wilderness survival contexts, but have largely disappeared from everyday urban experience. The dog maintains behavioral water assessment skills that most modern humans have lost entirely. Now let's talk about specific pathogens because not all contaminated water is the same, and the dog's tolerance is not uniform across all possible contaminants. Bacteria are the category where dog defenses are strongest. The combination of acid stomach, mucosal immunity, and microbiome-mediated colonization resistance handles most common bacterial contaminants in outdoor water effectively. E. coli contamination that would cause severe illness in a human is typically handled by a healthy dog with minimal or no symptoms. Salmonella is similar. Dogs can carry and clear salmonella infections that would require medical treatment in humans, though they can occasionally become symptomatic under high-exposure conditions or in immunocompromised individuals. Giardia is more complicated. Giardia is a protozoan parasite, not a bacterium, and it is not eliminated by stomach acid. It is adapted to survive the stomach acid of mammals and establishes itself in the small intestine. Dogs are susceptible to Giardia, and dogs that drink from outdoor water sources do get Giardia at measurable rates. However, dogs often clear Giardia infections without treatment, particularly in healthy adult animals with intact immune systems. The infection rate is real, but the severity in healthy dogs is typically much lower than in humans facing the same exposure. Leptospirosis is a bacterial infection transmitted through water contaminated with the urine of infected animals, and it is a real threat to dogs. Dogs in areas with high wildlife populations and standing water are at meaningful risk. This is one of the cases where the dog's tolerance for contaminated water reaches its limits. Leptospirosis can cause severe illness and death in dogs, which is why vaccination against it is standard veterinary practice in high-risk areas. The dog is better than humans at handling contaminated water, but better is not the same as invulnerable. Heavy metals, chemical pollutants, and industrial contaminants represent a category where the dog's biological defenses provide essentially no advantage. The immune and digestive adaptations that handle microbial contamination are irrelevant to chemical toxins. A dog that drinks from water contaminated with heavy metals or agricultural chemicals faces the same toxicological risks as any mammal of similar size. Dogs' impressive resistance to microbial contamination can create a false sense of security about chemical contamination that doesn't generalize. Cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, represent another significant limit case that deserves specific attention. Warm, shallow, slow-moving water in summer conditions frequently produces blooms of cyanobacteria that release toxins dangerous to dogs, sometimes fatally so within hours of exposure. The dog's acid stomach and immune defenses provide no meaningful protection against cyanotoxins, which are chemical rather than microbial threats. Dogs that survive E. coli-laden puddles all summer can be killed by a single encounter with a bloom-affected lake in August. The biology that handles pathogens has strict limits when chemistry is the threat. By the way, If you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Now let's compare more carefully with humans, because the comparison is where the implications become most interesting. Modern humans living in industrialized countries with access to municipal water treatment have essentially removed microbial water contamination from their daily experience. The immune exposure that ancestral humans would have had from variable water quality, the continuous low-level encounters with outdoor microorganisms that calibrated and maintained pathogen-specific immune memory, has been replaced by a sterile water supply that produces no immune challenge at all. This is good in the obvious ways. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery are not pleasant experiences, and eliminating them from daily life has been one of the great achievements of public health. But it has a less obvious cost, which is the progressive narrowing of the immune system's pathogen-specific experience base. A human immune system that has only ever encountered municipal water has no specific memory for the organisms that live in outdoor water sources. Encounter those organisms through travel, through a camping trip, through accidentally swallowing lake water, and the response is slow, nonspecific, and more likely to result in illness than the response of an immune system that has encountered these organisms regularly. Dogs in outdoor environments maintain the continuous pathogen exposure that builds and sustains pathogen-specific immune memory. In this specific respect, the breadth and currency of microbial immune experience, the outdoor dog has a more comprehensively calibrated immune system for environmental pathogens than most modern humans do. Not a stronger immune system in the general sense. A more specifically informed one for the organisms that live in outdoor water. There is also a comparison to be made in terms of what the dog's tolerance reveals about ancestral human water management. Ancient humans before access to clean water infrastructure were drinking from the same variable outdoor water sources that dogs drink from. They got sick more often than modern humans from waterborne diseases. But they also maintained immune systems that were continuously calibrated by those exposures in ways that modern human immune systems are not. The trade-off between pathogen exposure and immune calibration that the dog's biology illustrates has always existed for humans too. We just resolved it in a specific direction by building water treatment infrastructure. The dog represents, in a very real biological sense, the water relationship that pre-modern humans had for most of their evolutionary history. The immune architecture that makes the dog's dirty puddle drinking survivable is closely related to the immune architecture that allowed ancient humans to drink from rivers and streams without being killed by every microbial exposure they encountered. The modern human drinking clean water every day is the evolutionary anomaly. The dog drinking from puddles is the baseline. Now let's address one more dimension that almost never gets discussed in any account of canine water tolerance. The specific role of age, health status, and breed in determining how well any individual dog actually handles contaminated water, because the picture painted so far applies most cleanly to a specific kind of dog under specific conditions. Young puppies have immune systems that are still developing. The maternal antibodies transferred through nursing provide early protection that fades within the first few months of life, creating a window of elevated vulnerability before the puppy's own immune system has been calibrated by sufficient pathogen exposure. A puppy drinking from a contaminated puddle is not operating with the same defenses as an adult dog with years of outdoor exposure. Puppy diarrhea from contaminated water is common, sometimes serious, and occasionally fatal in very young animals. Senior dogs face a different version of the same problem. Immune function declines with age in dogs, as it does in all mammals. An elderly dog whose immune system is operating at reduced capacity may struggle with microbial challenges that the same dog would have handled without issue at 5 years old. The age-robust story of canine water tolerance is specifically a young adult dog story and generalizes imperfectly to the very young or the very old. Breed matters in ways that are less well understood but real. Dogs bred for specific performance characteristics, coursing breeds, working dogs with very lean physiques, may have different physiological stress responses to pathogen exposure than dogs bred for companion roles. The gut microbiome composition, which is partly shaped by dietary history and partly by genetics, varies between breeds in ways that likely affect pathogen resistance. There is not enough breed-specific water tolerance research to make confident claims about specific differences, but the expectation that all dogs handle contaminated water equally well is not well-founded. Let's close with what is actually happening when your dog drinks from a puddle, synthesized into a coherent picture. The water enters the dog's mouth, where lysozyme and other salivary components provide a modest first defense. It passes into the stomach, where pH around 1 kills the majority of the bacteria present. The small intestine, with its mucosal immune system calibrated by previous exposure, provides the next layer, identifying organisms that made it through the stomach and generating specific immune responses to them. The gut microbiome, with its diversity of resident organisms competing for space and resources, makes colonization by incoming pathogens harder through a mechanism called colonization resistance. The incoming bacteria simply can't establish themselves in a community of organisms that is already occupying the available ecological space. And if anything does establish itself and begin to cause illness, an immune system with broad pathogen-specific memory generated by previous exposure responds faster and more effectively than an immune system encountering the organism for the first time. The result is an animal that can drink from a parking lot puddle, absorb the microbial load it contains, and walk away fine, not through magic or mystery, but through the accumulated adaptations of an evolutionary history spent in exactly those conditions. Your dog is not being reckless when it drinks from a puddle. It is operating within the parameters its biology was designed for. Its stomach acid, its mucosal immunity, its gut microbiome, its pathogen-specific immune memory, all of it developed specifically to handle contaminated water. The puddle is not a threat to the dog. The puddle is, in a biological sense, the dog's natural habitat for hydration. You, by contrast, are the product of a water safety revolution that happened so recently in evolutionary terms that it's essentially invisible. Your body didn't evolve for treated water. It evolved for the same variable outdoor water that your dog is drinking from right now. The difference between you and the dog is not that the dog is robustly adapted and you are fragile. It is that the dog's immune system has maintained calibration by exposure, and yours hasn't. The biological potential for handling contaminated water is there in your genome. Tens of thousands of years of your ancestors drinking from rivers and ponds without water, treatment infrastructure put it there. The dog keeps the calibration active. You don't. Neither of you should drink from that puddle, to be clear, but only one of you would actually be fine if you did, and that one isn't the one holding the leash.